I was really lucky that I got to know my grandparents when I was growing up. Not everybody gets to. My husband Michael's grandmother only came over from Ireland one time during his whole childhood, and the only memory that he has of her is her scrubbing their kitchen floor. So I was lucky. Now, not all of my grandparents lived close to us, but I have fond memories of all of them. And because my mom's parents got divorced and then remarried, I had more grandparents than you would normally have. I had a Grandma Harrison and a Grandpa Bruce. I had a Meme. She did not like the word grandmother, so she chose the French version. Meme and Grandpa Bill. And I had a Grandaddy and a Grandaddy. Now, Granddaddy was my mom's dad, and he was Southern through and through. He grew up in Idabel, Oklahoma, had a sister named Wyota. I remember that he just loved Cadillacs, would only buy Cadillacs, and we would be driving down the road in his Cadillac with his leather seats, and he'd be belting out those hymns in his baritone voice. My granddaddy was great. I don't know exactly how tall he was, but to me, he was a giant. He was kind and he was thoughtful, and he just had this presence about him. I don't even know how to describe it. I just know that when he talked, people listened. And my sister and I, the one thing that we knew about our granddaddy, this is us, is that he was our protector. He was a leader in our family. He was somebody that everybody looked up to, and he loved us through and through, no matter what. Now, my mom, she loved her dad something fierce. And when it was clear that he was going to die, there bubbled up this worry, this fear, this tension. What were we going to do without Granddaddy? What would the world be like without Granddaddy in it? Who would guide us? Who would protect us? But an amazing thing happened when my granddaddy died. And that was that our relationship with him didn't die. It just changed. My mom could still feel his presence. She could still hear his voice in her ears. My mom still eats black-eyed peas every New Year's in honor of my granddaddy because that's what he did for luck. I always put money into those red buckets that the Salvation Army puts out at Christmas in memory of my granddaddy because that's what he always did with me when I was little, with a big old sack of quarters, plunking them in one after another. Whenever I hear a man singing a traditional hymn and belting out in a deep voice, I feel my granddaddy with me. Whenever I'm in the presence of someone who makes me feel safe, I feel like my granddaddy is there with me. His death was one of the biggest deaths that I've experienced in my life, and I remember the fear and the worry and that tension that I had, and it makes me think of the disciples and Jesus. The disciples weren't kings. They weren't princes. They weren't anyone of high regard in their villages. They were common. They were just common folk. And yet, they dropped everything. They dropped everything in their lives because there was this man named Jesus who was saying such amazing things, who was doing such amazing things, who had this presence about him that they just had to follow him. Jesus took everything that they knew about God, everything that they had learned in their lives, everything that they had been taught, and he turned it upside down. Jesus broke all the rules, and he preached that love was what mattered most. Not the rules, not the way we've always done it. Love was what mattered the most. And they'd been with him for about 3 years when he started to talk about how he was going away. He started to talk about how he wasn't always going to be there with them. Can you imagine what that must have been like for them? how worried they must have been. This was their Savior. This was the Lord. Was he really going to die? And then he did die, and not peacefully in his sleep, not from an illness, not even from a battle wound. He died a criminal's death on a cross, very public, very painful, with no respect for who he was or what his life had been about. His followers must have thought that their time with Jesus was done. What would they do without Jesus? Who would lead them? Who would guide them? Who would protect them? They must have thought that their relationship with Jesus was dead. But they were wrong. Their relationship wasn't dead. It was just changed. He was there. His presence was still there. He was still leading them. He was still guiding them. His physical body wasn't there anymore. And their relationship had changed. But their connection to him was as strong as ever. And so they broke the bread and ate it, and they drank the wine in remembrance of him. And they passed along his message down from generation to generation to generation to generation to you. Jesus' message has been that we are God's beloved children, and all that matters is that we love and care for one another. That God has a never-ending love for each of us. So Jesus isn't dead. He is alive indeed. He's alive in me, and he's alive in and through you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and you. So remember this day that Jesus is alive in each of us, and that it's our job to pass along that message of love. Happy Easter!